Hi everyone. So I'm going to do a respectful reaction video. I was excited to see that Tom Rifai, I hope I'm saying your name correctly, had a video which he tagged me in for. He's shown an interest in lean mass hyperresponders in our research. So I thought I'd just actually do a live reaction and record it. And if it's a decent video, then I guess I'll post it. So we'll see in a moment.
Tom Rifai here, and shout out to Dave Feldman. Thank you for the time, man. Just that we are here, as you know, out at the conference for age research drug development and the first of the X Prize Health Span Summit meetings in Copenhagen. So I'm not ignoring it all. I'm trying to fit in wherever I can information on lean mass hyperresponders, scary levels to many of us of ApoB in the context of those lean on frankly very high levels of saturated fat and cholesterol and sky high levels of ApoB. But
so let me actually jump in real quick on this part. For those of you who don't know, he had kindly left a fairly exhaustive comment on the prior data reveal that I did with doctors Adrian Sotomoda and Nick Norwitz, which you can check out, and you can see his comment that's in the YouTube down below. For what it's worth, Tom, I was not suggesting that you were ignoring. In fact, I'm literally doing this reaction video to further foster the curiosity and interest in this research. The other component, though, that I wanted to mention, and part of the reason I paused, is I realized that the present expectation is that the reason you're seeing this phenomenon with many people like myself, Nick, and Adrian, is that it is the consumption of dietary cholesterol and saturated fat that's driving the higher levels of LDL. I'm fairly confident that if you just do a little bit of a dive, especially in our meta-analysis, things predicted by the lipid energy model, you'll be convinced that the primary influence to the levels of high LDL and in particular ApoB, like you discussed, are not that strongly influenced by saturated fat and dietary cholesterol compared to the level of leanness, as would be predicted by the lipid energy model. Stated plainly, leanness and metabolic health will have a much, much stronger influence on what your resulting high levels of LDL cholesterol are when going keto. Think about it from this perspective. If you're working with a lot of patients who themselves are more overweight, more metabolically challenged, and they are not over-consuming, but just consuming a moderate amount of a ketogenic diet, we already have the data, and we've already published on it, that it's more likely that they will not see much of a change in their LDL. And ironically, but not so ironically because it's predicted by the model, the more obese, say above 35, the more likely their LDL cholesterol and their ApoB will likely go down because they're moving from a state of metabolic challenge to one of metabolic health. It's only when you get to like a BMI of 25 or less that you're actually going to see the higher and higher levels to the degrees that we see with those folks who are especially lean. Okay, now back to the video.
potentially some phenomena of resistance to plaque deposition. So that being said, I'm interested, I'm listening, I'm happy to discuss. And of course, I'm discussing with all of my good colleagues, Bill Cromwell, Tom Dayspring. I think these people are going to have to stay. And maybe in the sense of Dayspring, I'm not sure if Tom has chimed in on this, get involved in the discussion.
Absolutely, I could not encourage more this discussion. It's literally why I'm making this video right now, is anytime I have the opportunity to draw more attention, especially to literally the scientists inside of the field of lipidology. I mean, lipidology is the study of lipids. But this also is something I want to draw to your attention. The lack of conversation becomes more and more apparent the further we get into this research. I wasn't taking it seriously early on, and I think for fairly understandable reasons, because I'm not a formally trained researcher. I'm an engineer. And as such, when this was all just on a blog, cholesterolcode.com, many gave me the advice that I think was good advice to say, listen, you need to move this into the real research where things are going to get published, where these ideas are more codified and peer-reviewed. And that's what has since happened, as well as the more audacious feat of actually getting these data collected in terms of lean mass hyperresponders in CT angiography. And I'm so thankful we're there. And granted, while at this particular moment in time, we're waiting on a final publication of the match analysis. You've seen Dr. Budoff's presentation, hopefully by this point, on the data that will be published. I can tell you the paper itself will basically coalesce with that. You've likely seen the data that we just talked about, the one that you commented on. That was the reveal with Dr. Norwitz and Sonomoda. And the corresponding lack of association, for example, of LDLP and plaque formation. But I echo your sentiment, as I did in that video, as I would do here, that we're looking at a particular population. The thing is, I absolutely do contend that what we're looking at in the case of a lipid energy model is a greater and larger umbrella of lipid physiology overall. And that without having that conversation, by constantly keeping this in some almost like false choice between either the lipid hypothesis should inform us or not, such that we're not having these discussions on not just mechanism, but in particular on how it is that we can understand it in this context, I think is unfortunately a very large missed opportunity. And it's something that everyone's watching at this point in time, and understandably so. I'll fit in one more time. If you haven't seen this already, and I think I may have mentioned it in the prior video, but if not, I'll emphasize it here. We're filming a documentary around not just my story, but also this study. And we're not interviewing folks who are walking around with sky-high LDL, who are metabolically healthy, and who do not turn out to have plaque. Rather, our personal stories that we're focusing on are people who find special efficacy to treat their medical condition. Nick Norwitz, for example, has severe ulcerative colitis, and he uses the ketogenic diet in order to mitigate that. Folks with type 1 diabetes should be strongly interested in carbohydrate restriction as a way to manage their insulin levels. Bipolar disorder is another one that we're checking, that we had a great story on in this documentary that I think is really fantastic. There's a YouTuber, Lauren Kennedy, who got really massive in her discussing openly with YouTube how she's living with schizophrenia. She's titrating off all of her medications after being able to adopt, with the care of her physicians, a therapeutic ketogenic diet. And it's quite astonishing. Her story is amazing. Anyway, the reason I'm bringing all this up is because there are a number of people who are metabolically healthy, who go on a ketogenic diet, who see their LDL levels climb to substantial levels. And I think that there are a lot of doctors who are understandably, like yourself, very concerned about not just the high LDL, but of course if you have high LDL cholesterol, you all but certainly have high levels of ApoB, and need these data to better inform their decision. Like our principal investigator, Dr. Matt Budoff, like Dr. Karam Nasir, who's the PI of Miami Heart, like Brett Schur, who's a low-carb cardiologist, and of course my colleagues, many are taking what I would say is a sensible and evidence-based position that if the patient still would prefer not to take cholesterol-lowering medication and follow-up scanning suggests that they are low to no risk for cardiovascular disease, or like low to no plaque levels, for example, particularly for their age group, they're more comfortable with not taking steps to lower their LDL, again, if it's the patient's wish, and if they have no other cardiovascular disease risk factors. That's an evidence-based position. And let me reemphasize, if any of those conditions are not met, they would recommend lowering LDL. Now, this isn't me giving medical advice, and it's not my place to do so. But I do think that that is a change worth noting and putting it in contrast with what you're concerned about. People who do have other cardiovascular disease risks, we're not making any claims in that regard. Or for that matter, any of the doctors who are themselves care providers are not leveraging this research specifically for that group that we're not studying. So hopefully that gives you some comfort and also some better understanding of this context and why it matters. Anyway, I should continue on with the video, sorry.
because we want to figure this out too, all right? So you keep up the great work. My only ask is that we make clear that the lean mass hyperresponder phenomena is yet to be fully elucidated. And as we know, great claims require great evidence, and we're not there yet on this. It is definitely...
To be sure, it's not like a single line that gets crossed. This isn't, data come in a spectrum. It's not as if we're claiming this study is definitive, but by the same token, the study is by no means meaningless. It's an extremely strong step forward of many more steps to come.
Attention grabbing, it is worthy of attention, but my real concern, if you want the bottom line, is that we're talking to a population that are not lean mass. And there are many that will take information like this and rationalize it as to the benignity, if you will, in general, of high saturated fat, high cholesterol intake.
Okay, so that I really do think we need to separate these two topics. I know people who were severely diabetic, who've gone on a diet that has very high consumption of saturated fat and dietary cholesterol, and they are no longer diabetic. Their A1C is down. We can argue back and forth as to whether or not it's actually cured or truly reversed per se. I have my own opinion on that. Some members of my family, I would say, are effectively not diabetic, but are still very insulin resistant and therefore need to remain on a very low carbohydrate diet. But their low carbohydrate diet has a high intake of saturated fat and dietary cholesterol, but they do not have high levels of LDL, frankly, because they are not as metabolically healthy. So I do want to stress the importance of separating those two, because I think that there are a number of people who found enormous success with the ketogenic diet who would not concern yourself and your colleagues as much because their LDL would not be at the levels of a lean mass hyperresponder. So I just wanted to make that clarification.
When there's certainly a great amount of reason to be concerned that we are in a wave of cardiometabolic disease driven by not lean, but actually relatively high body fat to lean mass, muscle mass ratio.
Couldn't agree more.
That's all, and I appreciate the caveats. I've heard them. Please keep them up. Always discuss with your doctor. I hear those. I do. I think they could be a little bit more emphatic, to be honest, but I appreciate that very much.
I do want to fit in this one thing, which is if you followed me through my whole journey, in the very beginning, I would get excited about this research. I would say, I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic about people who have high LDL in the context of fat adaptation, but just in that context, bear that in mind. But it's true. A number of people would run with, oh, Dave's optimistic, as though Dave says this is fine, full stop, and he's made that conclusion. I would then change that to cautiously optimistic. I was cautious to really emphasize the cautious part. Even so, people still turned it into a false choice, which I don't love. And now I just don't even say cautiously optimistic, and I try to just emphasize, look, my job is to get this research and move it forward. But then on top of that, I further try in every appearance I'm in, every time I'm chatting about it, to say, please work with your doctor. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that compared to any non-medical professional on the internet, I probably say I'm not a medical doctor, and work with your doctor for your individual care. I would put me up against everybody on the internet. So with respect, I am quite emphatic. And I do think I regard myself well on where my qualifications start and where they end with regard to this whole journey. So I will continue to try to reemphasize it. But it is funny because I do sort of feel like that goalpost is just always moving. Again, I understand you're coming from a place of a doctor. You always feel like there can't be enough emphasis placed. And to that extent, I do my best. That's all I can say about that.
Many other out there do not even do that at all, so that's highly appreciated.
100% true.
But keep in mind that this is at this point I don't want to say esoteric population, but it is one in which that is minor, definitely. But that being said, we can learn from that. I remember the Gila monster discussion, and that was very true. Certainly wasn't the purpose of studying the Gila monster and then getting GLP-1 drugs. So these discussions are appreciated because there may be doors that open that are well beyond the original point.
I want you to remember this because I realize I'm not going to be able to. This is less esoteric than is thought. I realize this is sort of the new, I guess you could say, pushback that lean mass hyperspotters are a tiny group of people or something along those lines. If my original hypothesis is right, then this applies to the larger physiology. And the reason for the high LDL and the high ApoB is going to prove to be extremely relevant, which gets to the heart of causality itself. If we take something like smoking, the reason why your lungs are exposed to the high amounts of smoke have less to do with the causality of, say, something like lung cancer. Now, while we've never had an RCT to elucidate truly a threshold level that would come with an RCT of confidence towards causality, it hits such a high Bradford Hill criteria that many people would say, yeah, I feel as though we may not have worked out all the intermediaries between the exposure and the lung cancer itself fully, and we haven't done an RCT to know that it's happened in a blinded fashion. But we do know that there's enough of a threshold of Bradford Hill for the strength involved that indeed there is lung cancer such that we would say there's no point in doing so. And in the case of where people have it secondary, where they say are working in a bar or something where it's the equivalent of if they were smoking, 2 packs a day or 3 packs a day or what have you, sure enough, we still see those outcomes. Bottom line is this: no matter how healthy you are, if you are smoking 3 packs a day, your odds of getting lung cancer increase, or at least that is what we currently believe, right? By the same token, virtually all of our data that we've collected, and I make this point often and frequently, virtually all of our data for the association of LDL and corresponding cardiovascular disease are on populations for which there's some form of dysfunction in lipid metabolism, either through a disease you're born with, such as monogenetic FH, or something that's acquired, such as insulin resistance syndrome. But we have yet, until now, to prospectively follow a population with extremely high LDL, but who have no known version of dysfunction in lipid metabolism alongside low cardiovascular risk factors. This, as far as I know, ours is the first, and therefore it provides a special benefit for being able to examine the independent causality of ApoB lipoproteins themselves in this context. Why that's important is there may be a number of people who are interested and motivated in achieving both good metabolic health while also being on a ketogenic diet such that they remove all of these other cardiovascular risk factors. You and I both know, as you were just kind of alluding to here, that metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance, it is extremely highly associated, not just with all-cause mortality, but with cardiovascular disease in particular. So everybody in the Venn diagram is mostly overlapping. The area of interest is of the things that you can do as a doctor to mitigate the risk for patients. So it's understandable why there's still such a focus on LDL and ApoB, and I don't want to remove it as being a risk factor for populations outside of those that we're studying. But what I will push back on is whether or not our data can be easily ignored because it's presumed to only apply to this small group of people. Again, I may have to plant the flag now for a larger conversation later, but I'm firmly planting it that I believe this applies to lipid physiology overall. And this is where I believe lean mass hyperspotters will provide us way more information on this physiology, well beyond the exact studies we're doing on them in particular. I don't think they're as distinct as is being assumed by your colleagues. So,
and I think in this case, very, very important point. So there you go, man. All right, I'm about to walk into the General Assembly for the Healthy Longevity Medicine Society, which is another aspect and group that deserves a shout out while here. X Prize, fantastic. ARDD, fantastic. And I'm going to give a shout out too to my brothers and sisters in the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. You may not be here officially, but you are here in spirit as well. Take care. Love you all.
All right. That's a great video. I always like an opportunity to sort of chat and expand a little bit more, especially for people who are just tuning in. There are certainly, since these data were just released, the prelim data that I did before, there's a lot more interest. I saw that there were some other cardiologists who reached out. And so to the extent to where this conversation can keep going, we can keep expanding on it, I want to foster that. Like I said, I'm gonna stop and take more time where possible, where I feel there are new voices and new minds that are interested. Tom, for what it's worth, I would absolutely be interested, as you mentioned in another comment in another video, if there can be a conversation had with Dr. Dayspring. But that said, I'll concede, as far as I know, he's not as interested in engaging in these data quite distinctively, or at least this like broader conversation. But for everybody who is, please have them reach out. We're interested in working with them. I think it's crucial that we really understand this precipice, because I think this research possibly, don't know for sure, but possibly may really provide some groundbreaking possibilities on what's... Oh, there's my alarm. You know what? I have to run myself anyway. Let me know in the comments if you guys like this kind of ad hoc video. I can make these a lot easier than I can like a planned and scripted video and so forth. But I'm always looking for the opportunity to do more respectful responses to those who are interested in this research, especially if they themselves are in the field. So shout out to you all, and we'll catch you again next time.